Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Grow Tactics and Inputs That Will Set You Apart. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa Schiller, and I am the Senior Digital Editor for Cannabis Business Times. In today's webinar, you will hear from Jack Whipple, founder and CEO of design and management firm Whipple Effect and the main author of the Cannabis Cultivation Instructions, CCI book, a comprehensive step-by-step guide for every process in a commercial cultivation facility. In a few minutes, you'll hear more about the importance of the right nutrients for existing and startup cultivation operations, common issues that plague modern grows and how to fix them, and the overall importance of high-quality inputs for a healthy, thriving crop. Jack will also share highlights and insights from the CCI book to help growers achieve high-yielding, high-quality cannabis at the lowest possible cost. Before we dive into today's conversation, I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping notes. Everyone on this call has been muted and video turned off except for our presenters, but there will be time at the end of the webinar for questions. At any time during the presentation, if you think of a question, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. If you click on that, it will open the Q&A box, so please feel free to type in your questions at any time, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the event. Also, we are recording today's webinar, and we are sending a copy of the recording to all registrants via email in the coming days. With that, I am thrilled to turn the mic over to today's speaker, Jack Whipple.
All righty. Well, hello, everyone. And Melissa, thank you so much. And thank you to Cannabis Business Times for hosting this webinar today. So the title of this presentation is called Grow Tactics and Inputs That Will Set You Apart. And I'm sure everyone that's watching who is a part of the commercial cannabis industry is aware at this time that, it's highly competitive. A lot of the markets in the country are flooded. And now it's more important than ever to increase yields and increase your profit margins so that you can sustain in these rather challenging times for cultivation. So I like to always start out presentations with just a simple reminder that the foundation of all of this are plant physics. And these are just the natural laws that apply to all plants. So there's this amazing book called Plant Empowerment that talks all about energy balance. And ultimately, when going through the different pillars of cultivation that I'm going to touch on in a second, really what we're doing is controlling light, water, temperature, humidity, and CO2. And we want those all to be balanced, because if any of them are out of balance, you're going to have adverse reactions with your plants, which will lower quality and yield. And then I always like to also point out the chemical equation for photosynthesis, because it's quite basic. And this is the process that all plants use in order to grow and produce glucose. So it is 6 CO2 molecules plus 6 H2O molecules plus photon energy, which is light, equals 6 oxygen molecules plus glucose. So as you'll see, as we get into all of these different set points that we use for crop steering, it's really just manipulating and creating a proper balance between light, water, temperature, humidity, and CO2, so we can obtain as much photosynthesis as possible. So the way that I view cultivation facilities is that there's 4 pillars for success, and they really are all equally important. And they are environment, irrigation, management, and genetics. And so you could intermingle these, however, they're all interconnected. So if you have an amazing team that has tons of experience with irrigation and you have great genetics, but your environment's terrible, you're going to have all sorts of issues, from mold to having to turn the lights down, lower yield, so on and so forth. So you could have a great facility, great genetics, and a poor management team. No one's getting along. You're not going to be successful. All the others could be great, and your genetics could be small yielding and not very strong plants. You're going to have issues. So we're going to get into each one of these topics, but yeah, ultimately, what I tell all of our teams and what's just so important is that every single step of the process matters if you really want to have high yield, high quality results. So we're going to start with environment. These are all of these tables come from section 1.1 in the CCI book. In the CCI book, you'll see the environment, these environment tables immediately followed by the substrate and irrigation tables, but I'm going to break them apart for this presentation just so we can kind of go over them separately. But as you'll see, these are tables that show the PPFD, the CO2, the day and night temperature, day and night relative humidity, and then the day and night VPD, all the way from the first week of veg all the way through the 9th week of flower. So if you think back to the equation for photosynthesis, we're touching on all of those different set points now, except for the H2O part, which will come in the irrigation section in a little bit. And the difference between HPS and LED growing, the main difference here is that we run all of our temperatures in LED about 4 degrees warmer than we run the HPS rooms. And that's because the LEDs do not have infrared radiation coming off the lights, such as the HPS do. So HPS lights will raise the leaf temperature of your plants, and the LED will not do that as much. So that's why we grow our rooms that have LED lights a little bit warmer. So the foundation, in order to create these environments that you want from that last table, all starts with design build. And this is not necessarily a design build presentation. We could probably do another one of those that would last at least an hour. But I did just want to touch on that, like for every single project that we design, all of those set points that were on the last slide, I give those to the architects and engineers. The architects and engineers have tons of different tools. Some of them have a lot of experience with building cultivations at this point in time, but some in emerging markets, there's plenty of architects and engineers that have never done this before. Having those set points will really help them, because then they'll be able to put that into the computer programs that they have to build these algorithms. So always start with the set points in mind. Start with the amount of rooms that you want in your facility, because that's going to dictate your harvest schedule. And then from there, it's really important to just work hand in hand with the general contractors and the subcontractors to make sure that all of your equipment is in the right place. Because even if you have a really good plan, as anyone knows who's built these projects, unless you're marking the exact area that you want them and checking on this along the way, things could get put in the wrong positions, and then that will just create an imbalanced environment. And then, as far as equipment layouts go, when doing this design process, I just recommend to everyone to reach out to the manufacturers. Here I have a light map that Foch just created for us. And this is a facility that we're currently building that's going to be opened up in March of next year. This is in California. But in that light layout, they spec'd the A3i lights. I asked them I told them I wanted my max PPFD on the canopy at 1200 micromoles with the lights 5 feet from the top of the canopy. So then they give the average, it's 1,208. So they pretty much nailed that. The highest point's at 1,300. The lowest is at 976. But these are amazing resources. They created this for us. And then the picture on the right is a room that was built with A3Is. This was in Phoenix, not the California one. But just want to point that out. Reach out to everyone from the lights to the HVAC company, the CO2 companies. All of these companies want to work with people that are doing new builds. They want the business, and they're great resources. So now I'm going to go back to the environmental set points one more time, just to show that every single one of these set points can be, there's a bunch of amazing automation equipment on the market. So I just pulled these back up real quick to then show you on this next page. We currently work with Rhythm to control all the mechanical equipment in our facilities. And Rhythm makes everything really easy for us. So all of these set points from this page, I build recipes in the Rhythm for flower weeks 1 through 9. 9 I call the finish one because we'll be playing around with different set points for temperature and humidity and CO2 while we're finishing. But yeah, you just literally take those crop steering set points that you'll find in the CCI book in section 1.1, and you can upload them right into the Rhythm. And what's great about this is you load a new flower room, you say that it's in day 1, and it's 100% automated all the way from day 1 to day 63 for a 9-week cycle. The Rhythm will control your day and night settings for you. So again, we always check this to make sure that it's correct. And we're checking this on the Rhythm and the Arroyo software, which I'll show in a second. But this removes a lot of the human error. Manual facilities, if you have people needing to go in every week and change 10 different thermostats and a bunch of different dehumidifier controllers, it just turns into a mess. And if one person makes a mistake, it will just make an impact on the plants and reduce yield. And again, the Rhythm controls every single piece of equipment in the rooms, from the lights, humidifiers, dehumidifiers, HVAC, and the fans. So couldn't recommend it more. It's working great for us. We're installing it in all of the new projects that we're designing and building. And the team at Rhythm's great. They're always there to support any questions you have. Yeah, can't say it again. Highly recommend Rhythm. Okay, and then yeah, that's something else that I wanted to touch on. So these set points that I just shared in the previous slide, this is where we would start most of our cultivars. Pretty much all of them, to start with any new genetic, we don't push them as aggressively as we might after growing them a second or third time. So one of the number one things that controls plant height is temperature. So if we have a very tall genetic, for example, the high fructose corn syrup we're growing right now is really tall. This gelato fritter plant that we're growing is really tall. Glitter bomb, strains like that. Not only are we going to be running a generative irrigation cycle, which I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but we will take all of these temperatures in the first 3 weeks of flower, and we will drop the daytime temperature by 6 degrees. And then you also have to drop the humidity with that, because it's important that you keep the same VPD. You don't want to drop just the temperature and not the humidity. Because then that will affect your VPD, and lower VPDs, the plants will not transpire as much. So you have a potential to get deficiencies because the plants aren't uptaking as much nutrients. And if you're later in flower, low VPDs have the potential to create bud rot and are a better environment for powdery mildew and so on and so forth. So understanding how the environment works with the plants and how the plants will respond to the environments, that's all super important. I'm just giving a brief overview of all of this right now. The crop steering section in our book that goes deep into this is 30 something odd pages long and talks about a lot more nuanced stuff. But then also you'll see at the end of flower, we run colder temperatures. That's to bring out the nice purple color in the plants. In California right now, it's super important that your flower's purple, or you're going to lose $100, $200, $300 per pound. And temperature is something that will really help bring out that color. But then I also just wanted to touch on vapor pressure deficit, VPD, will always trump temperature or relative humidity. And what I mean by this is if you want to have a cold temperature, but it's going to shoot your relative humidity up to say 90%, and then that'll take your VPD down to like a 0.2. You do not want that at all. So I showed two different graphs from Arroyo here to show what a stable environment looks like and what an unstable environment looks like. So this top example, you'll see the green lines on this graph are the VPD lines. And for the most part, we're right between 1 and 1.2, which is exactly where we wanted to be. In this scenario, our temps during the day were right around 78, and then we were dropping them to 70 at night. And you'll see as we drop the temps, the VPD is still staying right in alignment with what we want over here. And how we were able to do that is using the automation from Rhythm. All of the equipment was also properly sized, which allows us to hit the set points. This is why design is so important. If you have a facility that does not have properly sized equipment, it's going to be something that you're constantly fighting. But it happens. We've grown in a lot of different facilities. Typically, if we start working with the client and they're around 1 pound of light and we bring them up to 3 pounds of light, they're almost always going to have humidity issues because the facility was not designed with dehumidification to handle us tripling the amount of water that plants are being fed. And then this graph below is a pretty extreme example of an unstable environment. You'll see, so one thing that you'll see in this scenario, they just have thermostats that you're not able to change the day and night temperature. So the temperature is pretty steady all the way across. And we're getting close. During the day, it'll pop up to a 1 VPD, but then get down to about a 0.4, 0.5 VPD. And then at night, the dehumidification just has no chance. The humidity is rising to 95% on and off all night, which drops the VPD down to a 0.2. This is not what you want. All of this equipment is controlled manually, so someone's having to go in to change stuff. All of the controllers for all of the equipment. And in this scenario, you're going to have reduced growth, deficiencies, and with that low of a VPD, you're almost bound to have bud rot as the flower matures later in later weeks. All right, so now we're going to go into irrigation. And once again, these charts right here in the CCI book, they're actually connected with the environments and the irrigation for LED go together. But I broke them apart here. So once again, just as the LED set points for environment are about 4 degrees warmer, we're also feeding typically about 0.5 EC higher for our drip EC. And then also we're having our substrate pour water ECs slightly higher when we're growing with LEDs as well. But as you'll see in both graphs, we have our the WC stands for water content. So the top one is max field capacity. So on the Arroyo graphs, that would be your highest water content for the day. The second one would be the minimum water content of the day. We have the dryback targets that we're shooting to hit for P3. And what P3 means is from the last irrigation of the day to the first irrigation the next day. So that big dryback period is the P3 dryback. And then we have the same set points for cocoa. So whether you're growing in rock wool or cocoa, we address both substrate types in the CCI book. And then this is the drip EC. So this is what your batch tanks would be made at and what the plants are being fed actively every day. And then below that is the substrate EC, which is what's called the pour water EC. So these bottom numbers are the EC, which ultimately just means the nutrient levels that you're building in the substrate. And then same thing, we go from veg all the way through to the end of flower week 9. And the closer that you can get to hitting all of these set points, the less stress your plants are going to have, and the better you're going to be set up for success, pretty much across the board. I would like to point out these Rockwell set points are growing Delta 6.5s, putting 3 Delta 6.5s onto a 3-foot expert slabs. And then these cocoa set points are growing in 1 gallon Dutch plant and cocoa. And if you're not growing in those, the rule of thumb, if you want to steer generative, your drybacks are going to be 50% of your max field capacity. So say you fully hydrate your substrate at 60%. If you want to do a generative dryback, you would dry back to 30% water content. If you want to do a vegetative dryback, it would be a 25% of the max field capacity. So that would be going from 60 to 45%. So again, all of those rules are in the book in much greater details, but that's kind of a general rule of thumb of how to think about these terms, generative and vegetative. And so now we are going into some of the tactics and the way that you can use these irrigation strategies. And again, so this is a breakdown of what the graphs would look like on Arroyo. I created them on a separate spreadsheet just to make just to allow me to label them a little bit better. But for the first 3 weeks, this first example, it's called the generative setting phase. And what you're going to see here is you're only going to see phase 1 irrigation events. You'll hear these commonly referred to as P1s. And what the purpose of P1s, as it says under phase 1, is for rehydration. So we're typically starting this 1 to 2 hours after the lights turn on. And we are bringing the water content of our substrate, whether it be Rockwell or cocoa, all the way up to max field capacity. And what max field capacity is the most amount of water content that the given substrate can hold. So in this scenario, we went from 20% up to 45%. This is an example in cocoa. And then during this P1 phase as well is when you're going to obtain your runoff. So here you'll see we had a max EC of 8. And after we achieved runoff, we had a minimum EC of 5. So this is what that graph looks like. In the generative phase, we have no phase 2 events, which would be the maintenance shots. We're going to go into those on the graph directly under this. And then the phase 3 is the dryback phase. So from the last irrigation event of the day all the way to the first irrigation event of the next day. And then underneath this would be the vegetative bulking stage, which is typically from week 4 through week 7. And the only difference here is that you're going to see there are P2 maintenance events. So as phase 1 is rehydration, bringing the substrate to max capacity and getting runoff. Phase 2, you're not going to want to get in. Typically, you won't get runoff here. The only goal is to give a smaller percent shot just to bring your substrate up to max capacity. And the purpose of this is to just delay the dryback. So here we were drying back to 20%. If I wanted this number, if the next day, if I only wanted to dry back to 25%, then I would add 1 or 2 of additional P2 maintenance shots. And what that's going to do is it's going to decrease the phase 3 dryback period. So that's how you think about it. Again, all of the dryback minimums and maximums are on these tables. So from there, we highly recommend using Arroyo to track all of this stuff, because it just makes it a lot easier and you can input much more data, as we're going to go into in this slide. So Arroyo is fantastic because it's a plant management software. So you'll see here in this first graph where the blue lines are the water contents, and the orange lines are EC levels. So you'll see as we rehydrate with these P1s, the EC is going to fall off, and then as we dry back, our EC is going to build. And again, the set points that we provide, those are the set points that we've been using for years. We've had great success with them. You can, let's say you grew a genetic a few times and you think, this is a really strong plant and I think we could push it a little bit harder. In that scenario, you could pull bigger drybacks and let the EC rise higher. And you potentially could get a lot more yield. But again, anytime that you're doing any experimenting or just growing the crop in general, one of the very most important things that you need to be doing is just observing the crop. The more you can observe the crop, the more data that you take, the more success that you're going to have. And I highly recommend taking pictures. You can input pictures into Arroyo. You can input plant heights into Arroyo. And then at the end, you can input all of your harvest yields and weights into Arroyo. And what's really great about this is as you try different tactics, let's say I grew the lemon cherry gelato, which is a pretty popular plant right now, and it finished at 4 feet. The next round, I could say, okay, I want to take this crop to 4.5 feet. And if I had put the plant heights into Arroyo the time before and have all of the, we also save every irrigation change that we made on these graphs. So I can go back and I could say, okay, I fed these plants 1,500 milliliters a day for X amount of days, and the plant ended at 4 feet. So maybe now I'm going to push that up to 1,800 milliliters, which will drop the EC a little bit. And then I can be measuring the inches to try to nail the next target goal. Or if you have an amazing round, you just copy and paste exactly what you did. And as long as your environments are stable, you should be able to replicate your results. So that's why we love Arroyo. At Whipple Effect, we've used Arroyo at every single facility that we've worked on for the last 4 years. And they are amazing strategic partners of us, incredible customer service, and hands down, my personal favorite platform for plant management. All righty. So just as environment are super important and the irrigation strategies are super important, nutrients are also super, super important. I'm sure anyone that's growing, most people have tried different nutrient formulas. Sometimes, you could be having a lot of success with the nutrients and all of a sudden they change something and you'll have really adverse effects or a bunch of clogged emitters. And that totally throws things off and creates a ton of extra work. So I'm pretty sure that everyone understands nutrients matter, but I really wanted to point something out specifically because this presentation is about setting your product apart from others. What I'm seeing here, and I've worked over the last few years, I've spent time working in the Southern California market, the Northern California market, Colorado, Arizona, have some clients in Oklahoma City. And it seems like one of the biggest issues and one of the saddest issues right now. And it makes sense because the prices of cannabis have been decreasing, but just about everyone, and there are a few groups that are doing a great job in using supplements and producing an amazing product. But the vast majority of the commercial cultivation facilities that I see, they use a simple 3-part salt formula and they use no additives. So in this competitive market, especially in California right now, the more terpenes, the louder the pack smells when the buyer is smelling it, the better it looks. All of these things can get you $100 extra, $200, $300, $400. The nuances of the buyers are highly educated at this point. And if you put out an exceptional product that uses supplements, people will be able to tell. And most importantly, the end user is going to have a much greater experience because there's going to be more terpenes. The flower is going to be tasting better, and the THC contents are going to be higher. So here I have listed, excuse me, the new cultivator series from Advanced Nutrients. This is the 3-part salt line. We've been using it at all of our facilities and having great success with it. But I would also like to point out that we're using these other supplement products from Advanced Nutrients. The Voodoo Juice Plus tablets, which are a bunch of microbes and mycorrhiza, the Bud Factor X, the Big Bud, the Overdrive, and the Bud Candy. These are biostimulant products that have extra carbohydrates in them, all sorts of enzymes in them. You can reach out to Advanced Nutrients for a much more in-depth. Again, if we went in depth about all of these different products, they've had multiple PhD scientists formulate these things for a very long time with tons and tons of testing. But I couldn't recommend it more. And some people, if they have something good going on, they're scared to try things. And I just recommend, even if you have a big 100-light flower room, have your team mix up a 55-gallon drum in the corner and just, hand feed a couple lights with these supplements. In my experience, the morphology will be different. Using these supplements, you will be able to tell 100% that the plants, the morphology of the bud, the trichome production, the terpene production, they will increase. And for us here in California, that has increased the amount of the dollars that we're getting per pound. And then the very best thing too is you have flower that you enjoy smoking more. There's nothing better than giving your friends flower that you're proud of that looks amazing. On the flip side, if you have generic weed, it's pretty embarrassing to bring some flower to someone that is not the best flower that you've ever grown. So anyways, I highly recommend it. And I using supplements, and I also always compare it to human health. Think of people that go to the gym. If you go to the gym, and you just go to the gym and you don't use any supplements, you might not work out as hard. You're going to be tired. You're going to have a slow recovery. But if you drink pre-workout before the gym, you're going to be amped. And then if you take protein afterwards, or say creatine or any of these things, your muscles are going to recover faster. You're going to put on mass. And then taking it to the highest level, the real hardcore bodybuilders, everyone sees the results when they're using steroids, so don't use P-load or, phospholode or any of the crazy PGRs, because that's like using steroids and those get tested for and unhealthy. But there are amazing supplements from Advanced Nutrients that have an amazing effect on the plants. And I highly recommend everyone start experimenting with these if you want to set your flower apart. And again, reach out to Advanced Nutrients. They have an amazing team. They will work with you. They'll come to your facility. They'll help train your staff on how to use these products. So again, nutrients matter. And I think, as we see the market get more and more and more competitive, you're going to need to set yourself apart if you want to have connoisseur flower, and this is definitely the way to do it. All righty. So the next pillar of cannabis cultivation success is management. You can have all of these things, like I said. You can have a great building that holds the set points. You can have a great nutrient line with an amazing irrigation schedule. But if the team is not being managed, if the rooms are not being checked every day, small things are going to get missed, and that can immediately lose you 5 to 10% from every round. So with Whipple Effect, we use Basecamp. Basecamp is great. It's an app on your phone, and everyone on the cultivation team is assigned a room. And we call them the room leads. And what they do is every day they go in and there's an AM checklist and a PM checklist. So here you'll see our staff comes in, they record the temperature and humidity, even though we have that saved in Arroya and in the rhythm. It's just, again, another point of redundancy to make sure that our rooms are being monitored at all time. They check for the plants to see if any are droopy or discolored. That typically means an irrigation emitter might be clogged. That rarely happens, but if you catch it immediately, you're not going to lose the weight of that plant. Make sure all the lights are on. If a fixture's out, it needs to be fixed. Making sure the fans are on and working. There's no floods on the floor. The irrigation valves are open at the back. Sometimes once a week, the filters are getting changed and someone might accidentally leave a valve off. And if a table doesn't get watered for the day, depending upon what phase that the plants are at, that could end up you could take a 10% yield from that entire table. So again, a lot of these basics are just super, super important if you want to maximize the yield and the quality of your facility. And then, just getting the equipment out of the room, making sure the overhead lights are turned off, recording the runoff data, and then cleaning the table screens at the backs of the tables. Simple stuff like that. If cocoa builds up in the screens and no one's paying attention to it, the table will start flooding. The plants that are at the back of the table will get waterlogged. And again, there you go. You're going to have multiple plants in your room that are not going to perform to their highest potential. And then, that finished product, you're going to have to sell it with the bee buds or make joints out of it. And you're just not going to have the same ROI. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the last slide. But I really wanted to focus on these specific things because most gardens that I go into to take on as a Whipple Effect client, there's just small fundamentals that are being missed that will literally affect every flower room 5 to 10% in yield. And that's gross yield. So really, when you look at net, that's going to be, double that, 20 to 30% of net profit being lost just because some of these fundamentals are not being followed. So the first thing I want to talk about is plant redundancy. Plant redundancy is so huge. And what that means is, say we want in our flower room, we're going to be putting 400 plants in there. So what we want to do is initially take 20 to 40% more clones. So that would mean taking 480 to 560 clones. The purpose of that is, even if we are having high success rates, we're going to be able to throw 10 to 20% of the worst clones away. So that then we're able to transplant and veg 440 to 480 plants. So then from those veg plants, let's say we did 480, only the 400 strongest plants are going into the flower rooms. We typically start with 40% redundancy in clones and then plant 20% more veg plants that we need. If the team is really getting dialed in and you're having 99% success with clones, you have a great mother rotation and your cycle is strong, we might drop that back to 20% more clones and 10% more veg. But ultimately, the number one most important thing when starting a flower room, on top of the environment being correct, is just as you'll see in this picture right below here. These plants had just gotten loaded into this room. Every single plant on every table is very similar to the same size. So from day one, we're set up for success. If the redundancy is off, the most common thing that I'll see is you walk into a room and the last 10 to 20 plants on a table are small and weak. And that can be fixed if you just have the correct redundancy. The other thing that the redundancy allows for, as you'll see the picture on the upper right hand portion of the slide, is we always sort the clones before we transplant them. So the clone manager, the person in the clone room, will go through a clone tray. We're only looking for clones that look like the clone on the left side of this. Beautiful root structure. The plant is healthy. The new growth at the top of the plant is growing. And so we will separate the trays in advance before giving them to the veg team to start transplanting. And we only want keepers. If you have plants that look like the rejects on the right side, that means that you need to A, have more redundancy, and B, also look at your mother stock and your mother rotation. If you did not have enough mothers to produce healthy clones that become keepers, you also need to analyze your mother rotation and add some moms so that you can have all healthy plants being transplanted in the veg. And then, just back to the basics. We always mark the tables with Sharpies so that, we have a plant density picked out. The plant density in this picture is 2.5 square feet per plant. But it's kind of hard to see, but there's black Sharpie lines all the way down. And the teams that are loading these flower rooms, they know exactly where the plants go. They go there every time. So they're bringing the plant in, putting it into the perfect position. They're not having to move them around afterwards. And again, that just saves a bunch of time. And the bottom right picture is what it looks like when you put a bunch of healthy plants into a room. You'll have a bunch of beautiful homogeneous canopies with big, beautiful flowers. Those nice purple flowers in that picture is the cultivar Trop cherries, which was really popular here over the last couple of years. Okay, and finally, one of the most important things, without a question of a doubt, while again, across the board, every single step is important. But strong genetics plus healthy plants equals yield and quality. If you grow the healthy plant, not only are you going to have incredible yields, but you will also have the most beautiful quality. You can push plants harder than they want to be pushed, which will create a blown out flower. But the set points that we have in our irrigation and substrate set points in the tables that we just previously went over and in chapter 1.1 of the CCI book, those set points will create yield and they will create quality. It was kind of funny. I was talking to one of my good buddies, Christian, who's an amazing friend, an amazing grower. We've worked at tons of projects together. And I called him the other day and I said, Christian, what's your opinion? 1 gallon pots versus 2 gallon cocoa pots. What would you prefer? And his only answer was genetics. I don't care about the substrate. He's like, genetics trump everything. And we can grow the same amount of weed in 1 gallons or 2 gallons if our irrigation's correct. So I've been telling some people that. I thought that was an amazing answer. And Christian's an awesome guy. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But genetics are so important, and not just for yield, but also right now in Southern California, growing these candy strains, which are the lemon cherry gelatos and the Chicago runts and the black runts and the pink runts, this whole runts family. They're a lot harder to grow and they're smaller yielders, but they're also pulling $200 to $400 $200 to $400 more per pound. So we'll get to this spreadsheet in a second about how we analyze all of this, but that the amount of time or the ticket for the flower that you're growing also plays into effect on the genetic decisions that you're making. Okay, so I'm going to try to speed this up because I'm kind of running out of time, but another tactic that is super important for quality and yield is using the Aqualab 3 from Arroyo. We started using this last year, and I came to one of the most shocking realizations in the last 11 years of growing commercial cannabis, which was we had definitely been over drying our flower. So there is this amazing team of scientists who have PhDs in curing fruits and vegetables that work with Arroyo. In the CCI book, there's a whole 30-page section on all of the science of water activity and all of this. But ultimately, to break this down pretty quick, anything above a 0.65 water activity is microbial content, and mold is no longer able to grow because there's not enough water in the finished product. So the sweet spot that we're shooting for is 0.58 to 0.62 water activity. AW is the unit of measurement for water activity. And this machine, the Aqualab, as we're drying, starting on day 6 or 7, we start taking sample flowers throughout the room, putting it in the Aqualab, and then it will give you the water activity reading. And dialing in this process, you can read about the process in the book. It's a little too long to share in this slide right now. But what this has allowed us to do is increase dry time, preserve terpenes, improve quality, increasing yield, because we went from having religiously a 14-day veg, and now we only veg from these small candy strains. We veg for 7 days. Some of the bigger and denser genetics we might dry for 10 to 12 days. So reduction in all of the dry time, and the way that increases your yield is there's more moisture content in your flower, so you're able to sell more water. And the beautiful thing about that is in doing so, it preserves the terpenes and it increases quality. And when you're in this range, 0.58 to 0.62, for us, when we're at 0.58 water activity to 0.59 water activity, we are closing that turkey bag and we're never burping it again. And then that'll just increase the shelf life as well. So highly recommend reaching out to Arroyo, starting to work using these Aqualab machines. It really changed the game up for us, and was one of the most eye-opening experiences that I've had in a long time for the post-processing, the entire post-harvesting processing time. All right, and then the final piece of all of this is just really breaking everything down and collecting all this data. So we make these spreadsheets that we use in all of our facilities to track and analyze every single genetic, because we want to know the grams per square foot and the dollar amount that we're making per gram. Because at the end of the day, you know, you're paying taxes on the square footages of these grow facilities. So if we have a 4-pound light strain that sells at $1,000 a pound, that would be $4,000, right? Where if for that light, and I'm saying it as lights, but really we break it down to grams per square foot. But at the same time, if you had a 3-pound light strain that sold for $1,500, you would be making $4,500 a light. It gets a lot more nuanced to break all this down by grams per square foot. Then we look at grams per watt. The flower plus the small flower. Then we break it down just for big flower and small flower. But the more data that you can collect, the better, because at the end of the day, with the margins being smaller, with the prices being lower, it's really important to analyze exactly how profitable every genetic is in your entire facility. All right. So everything that I just talked about is in the book that we just published. It's called the CCI book, which stands for Cannabis Cultivation Instructions. We go over growing with LED, HPS, cocoa, rockwool. It has 50 chapters, start to finish, from an amazing genetics chapter from Chris Levitt, who's done one of the founder of Nodes and did all of the breeding for the last multiple years for compound genetics, all the stuff about crop steering, SOPs for all of the basics from cloning to transplanting, veg, flower, drying, everything. Lots of pro tips. And those are just tips that we found from the last 10 years of cultivating commercially that just make things easier and more efficient. All the equipment lists that we use, everything that we use is in there, the amount of staff. There's all sorts of pictures. I've got to give a big shout out to my partner, Alex Gummer, who designed this entire book. He did an incredible job. And our amazing partners, Advanced Nutrients, for helping us take this across the finish line. And then all of the amazing sponsors that are in our books. And we highlighted the sponsors in this presentation. So if you'd like to see more information, you can see our Instagram at theccibook.com. Our website is www.ccibook.com. And my email is jack@whippleeffect.com if you have any questions or want to reach out. And same thing, you can reach out to the Advanced Nutrients team. They have they're super responsive on their social media. Whipple Effect Instagram got deleted for the last 2 months, so I'm fighting to get that back. But once that's up, you can reach out to us there as well. And Advanced and Whipple Effect also have websites. But yeah, that sums up this presentation. So thank you all for listening. And now I think we're going to open it up for some Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Jack, for this great presentation. And before we get to Q&A, I just want to let everyone know that there will be a link and a 20% off discount code provided in the chat box for those interested in purchasing the CCI book. And as far as questions, it looks like we have a few here. So for the 1200 ppfd room that you mentioned, is that being supplemented with CO2 or not?
Yeah, definitely. So let's go all the way back here and just look at the environmentals. All right. So HPS, we typically run at 1,000 ppfd. Some genetics can handle going up to 1,100, but with HPS, you'll start getting bleached. The tops of your colas will start getting bleached a little bit earlier. So yeah, we run 1,000 to 1,200 parts per million during this weeks 4 to 6, which is what we call the bulking phase. And then with the HPS, if we're doing 1,200 ppfd, we will definitely be running 1,200 parts per million of CO2 for that entire time. And then, as you'll see, we taper the light and the CO2 off in the last 3 weeks as we ripen the plants.
And also on the topic of lighting, can you speak to some of the reasons why you use LED lighting? Is there any other lighting you would consider? And also with all the equipment, do you worry about your carbon footprint and your energy usage?
Yeah, for sure. Excuse me. So, okay, so this is kind of a fully loaded question that has a few different answers. So I've used, over the last 4 years of running Whipple Effect, we've used 8 or 9 brands of LEDs. There's lots of different things to consider and factor. I prefer, we've had the best success with the fauche lighting. And what I love about the Foch lighting is the spectrum. They have less blue and a little bit more red. And for us, we found that just creates a lot more favorable morphology of the flower. That's along the lines of what we were used to seeing with HPS. One of the common misnomers, in my opinion, is everyone in the beginning was saying, okay, if using LEDs saves electricity versus HPS. That's because they were replacing 1,000-watt HPS light with a 645-watt LED light. So of course, that is the less wattage, the less electricity for sure. But the way that we're designing now, the only time that we ever use 640-watt LEDs is if we're in double stack scenarios because the lights are going to be closer. When designing single tier facilities, and I think I have some pictures. Yeah, so in this scenario, these Foch 3i lights are 1,500 watts. So you can put them on a bigger footprint, but ultimately, watts create BTUs of heat. So if you have the same amount of watts with HPS lights as you do with LED lights, you're creating the same amount of heat. So the carbon footprint is going to be similar. But as far as the carbon footprint goes, when it comes to waste, the HPS lights, you're going to have to be replacing the bulbs every 9 to 12 months. And with these LEDs, they're rated. They do have a small drop off, but yeah, I believe Foch has a 3 to 5 year warranty on these, and the diodes last way longer. So you're not going to have as much waste with these lights. And yeah, so those are the things that I think to consider. And the other really cool thing about the LEDs, if you dim LEDs, they keep the same spectrum. If you dim an HPS bulb, it changes the spectrum. So that's something that I think everyone should consider when making these choices as well.
And going back to the rhythm environmental control, does that incorporate a PID system that integrates the HVAC and dehumidifier and humidifier together?
Yes, I set all of these recipes from, so I literally just take all of these set points, whether I'm on HPS or LED, every single one of them, and you can input them day and night. So you'll see this picture on the left. There's my day temps, day humidity, day CO2, nighttime temp and humidity. I turn the CO2 off at night, and the next page shows the light level. And yeah, it controls every single piece of equipment in the rooms where we're using the rhythm are controlled by the rhythm. Nothing has to be manual. You can switch it if you want to change something for like an hour or two just to see what'll happen. You can do a manual override. So that's kind of cool if you're just getting curious and wanting to play around with some stuff. But yeah, our day-to-day recipes are all manual, and I get on and check them. We have multiple people. The number one thing that I have found to have, because before Whipple Effect, I was a founding COO of 5 different commercial facilities, and I'm probably one of the biggest culprits. The managers that are doing the most have the highest chance to make mistakes, because you're juggling a lot of things. So I might have missed something that could create an error. So, I made enough mistakes in my life and messed up enough crops that I finally just started all of the important stuff. Say I'll go through and check it, and then there'll be 1 or 2 people that come and check it behind me just to make sure that everything is in the parameters that we want it to be.
And another question from an attendee here is, what is your stance on organic versus non-organic supplements?
All righty. let's go here. My stance is that all supplements have an impact for sure. And the best flower that I have seen in all of 2023, I have to give a massive shout out to one of my really good friends, Michael Sagan. He owns a brand in Colorado called Higher Function. He uses, and this is common with a lot of my friends that grow unbelievable flower, but he'll use a salt base and then he will use different biostimulant products. He uses all of these supplements that I have listed here, but then he will also add on top of that some organic products. And yeah, using organics, I mean, it's undeniable. The plant will be stronger. The other interesting thing, because I was out in Colorado earlier this year working with Michael in some of his gardens. When you use these supplements and you throw organics on top of it, because I just listed the supplements that we're using on a commercial setting with Advanced, but we're also starting, or Advanced has organic supplements as well. So we're starting to play around with doing our initial hydration and veg with the organic teas from Advanced, and doing different stuff like that. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like if you're working in a room, in my experience, when I'm working with plants that have supplements and have organics, A, you can just visually tell the difference. B, my arms will break out with hives like 10 times worse than if it's just a base salt formula. Which, yeah, to me, that just tells me, you know, the plant is healthier. It has more of its natural defenses happening. The branches are stronger. You'll see better stacking. The morphology of the flower will be different. It goes a long way. The hard thing about using tons of organics is using it in drip irrigation. You have to be really strategic with how you filter them. Or what we've been doing is, you know, once a week, just doing mixing a tank separately and just hand feeding, doing a top dressing with the organics. So it can be done. It's a little bit more labor, but in all of the examples that I've seen recently and all of our own testing, the ROI is there for sure, with the price that you're going to get per pound.
Okay, and it looks like we have time for one more question here. So another attendee is wondering, what is your preferred plant density and plant work techniques?
All righty, that is a great question. Let me see here if I go back to the basics. Okay, cool. So, so one of the most important parts of taking data is to figure this out. So as of right now, if I bring a new genetic in that I've never grown, we're typically going to start that new genetic on a density of 2.3 plants per square foot. If it's a really wide plant, excuse me, if it's a much wider plant, like a couple of these lemon cherry gelato, there's multiple phenos of lemon cherry gelato, but the one we got from Seed Junkie and the one that's called ADL, it's a very wide plant. So we grew it on 2.3 square feet per plant. And we noticed that, you know, by day 14, the plants are already touching each other and growing into each other. And by day 21, you know, it's just creating a lot more plant work for us. But yeah, as far as, and then, you know, if we have a skinnier plant like high fructose corn syrup, which is a GMO cross, you know, the lateral branches on that plant just grow straight up, and there's not a ton of lateral branching such as the lemon cherry gelato. So that one, after growing on 2.3 square feet per plant, you know, we're probably going to start lowering it down to maybe 2.2, 2.1, even 2. So yeah, we're starting at a base of 2.3 and then playing with them from there. We could go as high as 3 square feet per plant. And then we typically don't go much below 2, maybe like 1.8 square feet per plant would be the very, very lowest we go. And again, all of this also depends on veg time. You know, we're typically vegging the plants for 12 to 14 days. But like at the lemon cherry, if we were going to veg it for some reason for 3 weeks, I would probably put it closer to a 3 square feet per plant because it is just really wide. And then, yeah, as far as plant work goes, when we're doing a 2 week veg, we do no plant work in veg. Unless we randomly will top a plant. We typically don't top the high fructose corn syrup. Sometimes we will top because they just, yeah, there's not a lot of lateral branch production. But let's just say standardly we're doing a 2 week veg. We do no plant work in veg. And then somewhere between day 5 and 10, we will do phase 1 of plant work, which is lollipopping. And we'll be pretty aggressive on that, just leaving, the top 3 or 4 nodes on each branch, but not pulling off any fan leaves other than that. And then phase 2 of plant work, we will be, which in phase 2 plant work, we're just typically if we get our density right, we're just removing the fan leaves that are attached to the central stalk. We will do that between day 21 and 28. And then with the perfect density, the goal is not to do plant work again until, at the very end of flowers, say week 8, when you strip the plant completely. If the plants are a little too dense, we will then go in at the beginning of week 6 or at the end of beginning of week 6, beginning of week 7, thin out any more leaves. Ultimately, the goal with all of this plant work is that light is penetrating the canopy and hitting your flower sites. Removing the fan leaves is also going to increase airflow. But it's important to remember the fan leaves are what create photosynthesis, and the more fan leaves that you have on the plant, the more energy the plant is going to have to grow the flowers. But it's a happy medium. If a big fan leaf is covering 5 flower sites, those flower sites are going to be underdeveloped. But yeah, those are the general timelines. And again, we go over all of these timelines in the CCI book for 8-week strains, 9-week strains, and 10-week strains for the different genetics that have different flower periods. So yeah, great question, and that's pretty much the rule of thumb of how we approach that.
Okay, well, it looks like we're just about out of time here, but this has been a fantastic conversation with excellent questions. I want to thank you, Jack, again for being with us today and sharing these insights. And thank you to Advanced Nutrients for making today's webinar possible. Also, thanks to everyone who joined us today and for your great questions. For those questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll be answering the questions via email after the webinar. And as I noted before, a recording of this conversation will be sent to your email very soon. So thank you everyone again, and enjoy the rest of your day.